What if everything you knew about natural enemies turned out to be wrong? On a quiet Texas morning, beneath the sheltering arms of an ancient oak, two of nature's fiercest rivals clashed. Shadow, a wild bobcat, and Titan, a massive Burmese python. The world should have ended in violence. But as dawn broke over bloodied grass and battered fur, something impossible happened. Predator and prey, side by side, too wounded to fight, too stubborn to surrender. If you believe stories like this can change hearts, give this video a like. And if you want to see more miracles from the animal world, hit subscribe and join our community. Stay with us, because this story will challenge everything you believe about survival, trust, and the wildest kind of hope. Shadow moved like a rumor through the grass. Low, silent, almost invisible, his tawny coat blending perfectly with the earth. He was a bobcat, lean and muscular, eyes sharp as polished amber. Years of hunting had carved cunning into every line of his body. This morning, his world was all scent and sound. The distant call of a hawk, the rustle of field mice in the undergrowth, the damp sweetness of wild sage. He paused, sensing movement. A shift in the air, a ripple in the silence. It wasn't the panicked scurry of a rabbit or the bold stride of a deer. It was slower, heavier, a danger that crept instead of ran. Shadow's ears flicked, nose twitching. Every instinct told him to turn back, but something rooted him in place, curiosity threaded with fear. Suddenly, the grass behind him exploded. There was no warning, no time to react. In a blur of speed, a massive shape surged forward, scales glinting, jaws gaping. Titan, the infamous Burmese python, struck with terrifying force. He was a legend on this land. Thick as a fence post, longer than a pickup truck, muscles coiled with raw power. His eyes were golden slits, ancient and cold. Titan wrapped around Shadow with the precision of a hangman's noose. The air vanished from Shadow's lungs. He thrashed, claws slashing desperately, trying to dig into Titan's hide. But the python's grip was relentless, every movement only making the coils tighter. Titan's weight pressed Shadow into the dew-soaked earth, squeezing, crushing, the world shrinking to nothing but pain and the thunder of his own racing heart. Most animals would have given up. But Shadow was not most animals. Panic flared, then flickered into something sharper. Strategy, the raw will to live. He raked his claws through the grass, searching for something, anything. His back legs found the tangled roots of the oak tree, rough, solid, a lifeline. He hooked his claws in and shoved, pushing himself sideways, wriggling and twisting, ignoring the fire in his ribs. Titan sensed the movement and tightened his grip, scales rasping against Shadow's fur. But the roots caught the python's bulk, creating just enough slack. Shadow heaved again, using the bark as leverage, scraping off skin and fur in the struggle. The world spun with every gasp, dew turning to mud beneath them. Titan hissed, jaws open, the sound cold and furious. Somewhere overhead, a crow cawed. The oak's branches shivered, scattering droplets like tiny beads of glass. Shadow's vision blurred, darkness crowding the edges. Still, he fought, scratching, kicking, driving himself toward the tree. At the last moment, as Titan shifted to adjust his grip, Shadow twisted violently, using every ounce of his remaining strength. The python's head struck a root, his coils loosening just a fraction. That was enough. Shadow lunged, slamming his own battered body against the bark. Titan's hold slipped, and for a heartbeat, both animals were locked in a stalemate. Neither able to win, neither willing to surrender. Blood and dew stained the ground, the air electric with pain and fury. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the struggle ended. Titan's grip slackened. Shadow collapsed in a trembling heap, chest heaving, every muscle burning. Titan slithered away a few feet, scales scraped and torn, his massive form shuddering from the effort. They lay there, predator and prey, both too exhausted to move. The sun pushed a little higher, turning the dew to steam. Shadow's breaths were shallow, pain throbbing through every limb. He watched Titan, waiting for the next attack, but the python simply watched him back, tongue flicking, eyes unreadable. Minutes passed, slow and surreal. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A pickup engine rumbled. But in this small patch of wild, time had slowed to a crawl. Two enemies, too weary to hate, too wounded to finish what had begun. A rabbit crept from its burrow, pausing at the edge of the clearing. Birds swooped low, curious and bold. The world moved on, but for Shadow and Titan, everything had changed. Each had seen the other's strength and their pain, and so, in the hush that followed the chaos, a new question hung in the air, shimmering like dew in the rising sun. Was this the end, or the beginning of something neither could have imagined? The answer, for now, was tangled in blood, mud, and silent breath, waiting for the next moment to decide. First light had fully claimed the Texas sky, burning away the lingering mist. But under the old oak tree, the world felt fragile, split in two. It was the ranch owner, old Mrs. Harper, who first saw the aftermath, a patch of torn grass, streaked with blood, and the impossible sight of a bobcat and a python sprawled side by side, both battered and motionless. Her voice, shaky with disbelief, crackled over the radio. "You folks better get over here. Something's gone real strange out by the oak grove." Ranger Emily Brooks was behind the wheel in under 5 minutes. Her deputy's badge glinting on her flannel, boots caked in the memory of a dozen rough Texas mornings. Riding shotgun was Dr. Ben Carter, a wildlife biologist with a notebook full of field sketches and a soft spot for lost causes. As they sped down the gravel path, Emily checked her sidearm more out of habit than need. Ben adjusted his glasses, trying to steady his breath. He'd heard the legends. Bobcats gone missing, sheep strangled, rumors of a monster snake that haunted the lowland shadows. They reached the grove just as a pair of blue jays burst from the branches in alarm. Mrs. Harper pointed, her weathered hand trembling. "There, right there." Ben and Emily stepped carefully through the tall grass, senses tuned to the thrum of something unnatural. Then they saw it. Shadow, the wild bobcat, belly rising and falling in shallow, unsteady rhythm. Titan, the massive Burmese python, a tangle of muscle and battered scales, lay just inches away, tongue flicking weakly, eyes alert but unfocused. Emily's instincts screamed at her to raise her tranquilizer gun, to step between predator and prey. "Stay back, Ben. That cat'll shred you. And that snake—" Ben stopped her with a gesture, his voice low. "Wait. Just look." Instead of the carnage they expected, they saw an uneasy truce, a silence thick with meaning. Shadow, bruised and bleeding, stretched out a trembling paw and nudged Titan's battered snout. Not a swipe, not a bite. Just a curious, hesitant push, as if asking, "Are you still alive? Are we still enemies? Or is there something else we're supposed to do now?" Ben knelt slowly, heart thudding. He'd spent his life studying animal instincts, charting territory and hunger, flight and fight. But nothing had prepared him for this. Emily kept her weapon ready, jaw tight, torn between duty and awe. Shadow's golden eyes never left Titan's. The python barely moved, but something in his posture softened, a shiver through the length of his body, not from fear but fatigue. For a long moment, the two creatures just breathed, the air thick with the scent of sweat and earth, the aftermath of a battle that should have ended in death. Emily muttered, "This is nuts. The cat should have run. The snake should have finished the job." Ben shook his head, voice hushed. "They're both hurt bad. Maybe they know they're not a threat right now. Maybe that's enough." Mrs. Harper hovered near the truck, crossing herself. "Never seen anything like it in my life, and I've lived through hurricanes and a funnel cloud or two." Emily called the local vet on her radio but kept her eyes on the scene, wary of sudden violence. Ben, emboldened by the strange peace, took a cautious step forward, notebook in hand. He whispered, "Hey, Shadow, easy boy. We're not here to hurt you." Shadow flinched at the sound, muscles bunching, but didn't run. Instead, he pressed closer to the ground, tail twitching, wounded, but not ready to give up the ghost. Titan watched Ben too, tongue testing the air, reading the fear and curiosity radiating from the humans. Emily and Ben exchanged a look, half terror, half fascination. Ben said quietly, "What if we just watched? See what happens?" For the next hour, they kept their distance, letting the scene unfold. The breeze carried the smell of wildflowers and fresh blood. Somewhere a coyote howled, but neither Shadow nor Titan stirred. Slowly, the python gathered himself, coiling just enough to protect his torn side. Shadow, ribs heaving, curled his tail around his paws and glanced up at Ben, then back at Titan. A pair of field mice scurried past. Shadow's gaze flicked toward them, a flash of old hunger, but he made no move to chase. Instead, he shifted to a more comfortable position, keeping Titan in his periphery. Ben began sketching, his pencil flying across the page. "Emily, do you see that? The bobcat's not running. He's staying with the snake." Emily kept scanning the tree line, hand never straying far from her tranquilizer. "I see it. Doesn't mean I trust it." The vet finally arrived, Doc Ramirez, all business and boots, and she too froze at the sight. That's not normal. What did you two do?" "We didn't do a thing," Emily answered, her voice shaky. "This is all them." Doc Ramirez wanted to sedate both animals, but Ben protested. "If you shoot them now, we'll never know what's happening. Let's give it a little longer. Just watch." And so, with the sun high overhead, the four humans formed a silent ring around the wounded pair. They watched as Shadow, driven by a mix of exhaustion and strange loyalty, nudged Titan once more, almost as if he understood that the old lines between enemy and ally were blurring. Titan blinked slowly, uncoiling enough to rest his battered head near Shadow's paw. Ben's heart pounded. There's something happening here. Something bigger than fear or hunger. Emily finally lowered her weapon. "If this goes south, you owe me lunch." They waited, the air pulsing with suspense. Out in the open, two wild creatures, predator and prey, had found a truce, or maybe something more. Ben didn't have the words for it yet, but he knew, deep down, that the world was about to change, and all they could do was witness the beginning. The air over the Texas ranch grew thick and golden as the sun drifted west, slanting through the oak's heavy branches and turning the bloodied grass to bronze. The strange stillness that had settled over the clearing held its grip, drawing out every minute. For Shadow and Titan, their world had shrunk to a battered patch of earth beneath the oak, each breath a reminder that they'd survived the unthinkable. For the humans, the shock was fading, now replaced by an ache of curiosity and awe. Ranger Emily Brooks paced the edge of the scene, boots crunching softly in the grass. Her fingers hovered near her tranquilizer gun, her gaze flicking from the bobcat to the python and back again. Every law she knew about nature told her this was wrong. Predator and prey should not rest side by side, not unless one was planning a final attack. But the moments stretched on, and the attack never came. Dr. Ben Carter, meanwhile, knelt just a few feet away, notebook open on his knee, scribbling rapid observations. Sweat trickled down his temple, but his eyes were alive with wonder. "Shadows hurt bad," he murmured. "Look at the way he's holding his left flank, and Titan's got some deep scrapes along his body. I've never seen injuries like this from a wild fight. Not where both walk away." Emily shot him a skeptical look. "You think this is walking away? They're both half dead, Ben." He almost smiled, the tension of the moment stretching his features. "But they're alive, and neither is trying to finish it." The vet, Doc Ramirez, stood back, hands on her hips. "I can treat them, sedate them, patch them up. But if we interfere now, we break whatever. I don't even know what to call it. This is." She glanced from Emily to Ben, then at Mrs. Harper, who stood by her truck, mouth pressed in a tight line. Emily sighed, the sound tired and wary. "We're not trained for this. I'm a ranger, not a peace negotiator." But something about the Bobcat's posture, low, protective, not aggressive, held her in place. She felt the rules inside her start to bend, the old boundaries of fear and duty blurring into something new. Shadow raised his head, ears swiveling as Ben's pencil scratched softly on the page. Titan, still coiled but less tightly now, flicked his tongue out to taste the air. The two animals were caught in a fragile détente, a wary mutual exhaustion that felt more like respect than surrender. A gentle breeze rustled the oak's leaves. Shadow, with a trembling effort, dragged himself a few inches closer to Titan. Not an attack, but as if drawn by some magnetic pull. Emily's heart hammered. "Ben, if that cat so much as twitches the wrong way, just wait," Ben whispered. "Give him a chance." Doc Ramirez stepped forward, holding out a gloved hand, her voice gentle. "Easy now, Shadow. Easy." She crouched, moving slowly, and unzipped her field kit. The Bobcat's eyes narrowed, hackles bristling, but he didn't bolt. Instead, he seemed to stand guard, body blocking Titan from the humans. The python watched her, every muscle coiled for flight, but too weak to move far. Ben took a risk, holding out a strip of gauze so Doc could tend to the python's wounds. "He's not threatening us, he's watching her back." Emily, unable to stand the tension, set her tranquilizer aside and crouched beside Ben. "You really think Shadow's protecting the snake?" He nodded, his tone quietly awed. "I think he knows they both survived something impossible. Maybe that means something, even to animals." As Doc Ramirez cleaned Titan's scrapes, Shadow's body trembled with fatigue. The Bobcat's instincts warred with something deeper, something like empathy. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't swipe or snarl. He simply watched, eyes locked on Doc's careful hands, tail twitching with nerves. Emily studied the scene, her skepticism fading, replaced by fascination. "Look at his body language. He's tense but not attacking. He's protective." The evening wore on. As the sun bled orange across the horizon, the grove became a world unto itself, a secret pocket of peace surrounded by endless, wild Texas. Ben continued to document every moment, snapping photos and recording video with trembling hands. He felt the weight of history in the air. "No one's going to believe this," he muttered, half to himself. Emily rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress a smile. "That's why you're filming it, right? To prove we're not all losing our minds?" A pair of crows landed on a low branch, cocking their heads at the strange gathering. Doc Ramirez finished tending Titan and then gently dabbed at the blood matting Shadow's fur. The bobcat's eyes darted to Titan, then back to her, and he let her work. The trust in the moment felt sacred, as if one wrong move could shatter it all. Night crept up, slow and velvet, the grove filled with the music of cicadas, the rustle of distant animals. Doc Ramirez packed up, nodding to Emily. They need rest. So do we. But I want to keep someone nearby tonight. If either of them crashes, we act. Emily agreed, setting up a small camp at the edge of the grove. She left her radio on, just in case. But as darkness deepened, she found herself drawn to the unlikely pair beneath the oak. Shadow and Titan, predator and prey, rested side by side under the sheltering branches. They weren't friends, not yet, but the old roles had broken. Something new was growing in the space between them, a raw, cautious compassion, stronger than fear. Ben scribbled a final note. Tonight, a bobcat guards a python. The world is bigger than our rules. As the first stars winked overhead, he set down his notebook, feeling the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The line between enemy and ally had blurred. Somewhere in the darkness, a lesson waited to be learned. And as Shadow closed his eyes, Titan's massive body relaxed beside him, the oak tree sheltering them both, a wild peace, holding its breath for dawn. Morning light slipped through the tangled branches of the old oak, painting dappled shadows across the battered earth where Shadow and Titan lay. The grass, still wet with dew, was pressed flat from the night's uneasy truce. Birds chattered cautiously, unsure if this patch of the wild was safe or if the strange peace would end as suddenly as it had begun. Emily Brooks woke with a crick in her neck and the taste of cold coffee on her tongue. She sat up in her makeshift camp, her first glance going straight to the oak. The sight that greeted her was just as strange as the night before. Shadow, the battered bobcat, was curled not far from Titan, the immense Burmese python, both breathing, both alive, both clearly aware of each other's presence. She shook her head, muttering, "Still here, still crazy." Ben Carter joined her, camera in hand, his notebook already open. He'd barely slept, heart racing with questions and theories. He watched as the first rays of sun touched the pair under the oak, bathing them in gold. "I don't think I'll ever get used to this," he whispered. "Every instinct I have says it's impossible." But the impossible was happening right in front of them. Over the next days, a fragile rhythm settled in. Shadow, limping and still bruised, visited Titan regularly. He would approach with slow, careful steps, eyes alert for any sudden movement. Titan, wary at first, would tense, his great coils shifting as if ready to strike or flee. But when he saw Shadow's cautious approach, he'd relax just a bit, never fully letting his guard down, but no longer seeing the bobcat as an immediate threat. Emily and Ben took turns watching from a distance, careful not to disturb the pair. They saw behaviors that defied everything they knew. Shadow brought scraps of food, field mice, small birds, dropping them near Titan's massive head. At first, Titan ignored the offerings, more interested in rest and recovery. But eventually, hunger won. He accepted the food, swallowing it whole, eyes flicking once toward Shadow in what looked almost like gratitude. On the third morning, Emily witnessed something she'd have bet her badge was impossible. Shadow curled up just feet from Titan, back turned, tail flicking idly in the grass. The python watched, head raised, but made no move. Instead, he lowered his great body to the ground, a slow, heavy gesture that spoke of trust, a surrender of power that in the wild could mean death. But here, under the old oak, it meant something different. Emily grabbed Ben's arm, whispering urgently, "Look, look! There, he's letting his guard down." Ben, scribbling furiously, could hardly contain his excitement. This, this is how bonds form in the wild. Through need, through survival. But they're crossing a line. This isn't just tolerance, this is connection. As days passed, the subtle dance between the two animals deepened. Shadow would stalk the edges of the grove, his presence enough to keep scavengers and curious coyotes at bay. Titan, always alert, began to rest more easily, his breathing calm, his coils loose. They communicated in small ways: head tilts, the flick of an ear, a slow, deliberate blink. Emily noticed the way Shadow would glance back at Titan before leaving, and the way Titan would orient his body toward Shadow, even when dozing in the afternoon heat. One day, a red-tailed hawk swooped low, screeching at the sight of two unlikely allies. Shadow leapt to his feet, hackles raised, standing between the bird and the python. Titan, sensing the threat, drew himself into a defensive coil. The hawk circled, then, seeing there would be no easy prey, veered away. Shadow settled again in the grass, and Titan relaxed, tongues flicking out in a silent exchange. The grove became a place of quiet observation and growing wonder. Ben set up motion-activated cameras, eager to capture every interaction. He watched hours of footage, marveling at the transformation. "They're not just surviving," he told Emily late one night by the fire. "They're adapting, learning from each other." Emily, who had always seen nature as red in tooth and claw, began to question her own beliefs. Maybe there's more to animal behavior than just instinct and hunger. Maybe, just maybe, they're choosing this. Researchers soon caught wind of the story. A team from the local university called, asking for updates. The ranch owner, Mrs. Harper, stopped by each morning bringing coffee and pastries, always shaking her head in disbelief at the sight of the bobcat and python resting together. Emily grew protective of the strange pair, shooing away curious onlookers who heard rumors of the crazy bobcat and killer snake forming some kind of wild alliance. She worried that too much attention would shatter their fragile peace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ben recorded a video of Shadow and Titan lying together under the oak. The light caught on Shadow's graying fur and the iridescent shimmer of Titan's scales, two survivors bound by experience, if not by nature. Ben uploaded a short clip online. By morning, the video had gone viral, sparking heated debate among scientists and animal lovers alike. "How is this possible?" read the top comment. "Nature never ceases to amaze." But for Emily, Ben, and anyone lucky enough to witness it in person, it was no longer a question of how. It was a testament to survival, adaptation, and the beginnings of something beautiful. A bond forged not by blood, but by shared struggle and the quiet decision, day after day, to trust the impossible. And every night, as the moon rose over the Texas ranch, Shadow and Titan found rest together beneath the oak, a living question mark in a world full of easy answers. Rumors travel faster than any coyote on the Texas prairie. At first, it was just whispers among the ranch hands. Stories about a bobcat and a python not just surviving, but living side by side, hunting and sleeping beneath the same tree. Then someone snapped a blurry cell phone photo, posted it online, and within days the story had spread far beyond the ranch's fence line. Some people scoffed, saying it had to be a hoax. Others were obsessed, determined to see the legendary duo with their own eyes. Most, though, were afraid. Invasive pythons were hated in these parts, seen as monsters from another world. It was a stormy Wednesday when the first strangers arrived. A rusty pickup rolled up the ranch drive, mud splashing the fenders, music blaring out of cracked speakers. Two men climbed out, one tall and thin with a scar down his cheek, the other stocky, wearing a battered camo cap. They introduced themselves as snake experts, but Emily's gut told her otherwise. She saw the greed in their eyes, the way they scanned the land, hands always close to the nets and cages in the truck bed. "Just here to help keep folks safe, ma'am," the taller one said, flashing a crooked grin. Emily forced a smile, keeping her own hand close to her belt. "The animals are being monitored by wildlife authorities. No need for outside help." The men lingered, making calls and eyeing the oak grove through binoculars. That night, Emily and Ben found tire tracks near the back fence, fresh, deep, leading right to the edge of the sanctuary. Ben frowned, his voice tight. "They're after Titan. The black market pays thousands for an exotic snake that size." Emily nodded grimly. "And they'll kill Shadow if he gets in the way." They doubled their patrols, sleeping in shifts. Emily notified the sheriff, who promised to send a cruiser by every few hours. But out in the wild, law was thin and darkness thick. The danger grew as the rumors spread, stories twisting in every retelling. "That python's a man-eater," some said. "The bobcat's cursed," others whispered. By Friday, 3 more trucks had parked on the far side of the property, their drivers pretending to fish or camp, but always glancing toward the grove. That night, as thunder rolled on the horizon, the poachers made their move. It began with a sudden, unnatural silence. Even the crickets stopped singing. Shadow, always alert, sensed something wrong. He rose silently from Titan's side, ears pricked, muscles tense. The breeze carried the scent of sweat and gasoline, a human smell, sharp and bitter. In the darkness, a pair of flashlights bobbed among the trees. The men moved quietly, nets at the ready, their eyes scanning for the glint of scales or the shimmer of feline eyes. They'd come for the python, but they knew the bobcat was near, and they'd brought a rifle just in case. Shadow melted into the shadows, every movement honed by instinct. He skirted the edge of the grove, watching as the men closed in on Titan, who lay hidden among fallen leaves, his massive body almost invisible in the dark. Titan's tongue flicked anxiously, reading the danger in the air. Emily and Ben, sleeping in their pickup nearby, woke to the sound of footsteps. Emily grabbed her flashlight and sidearm, Ben his camera and a length of rope. They crept toward the grove, trying not to give themselves away. The first poacher spotted Titan, whispering, "There he is, by the big root." They crept closer, net raised. Shadow, realizing there was no time to warn Titan with a cry, made a choice. He leapt from the darkness, claws extended, slashing at the poacher's leg. The man cursed, stumbling backward, the net tangling in his hands. "Damn cat!" the other man yelled, swinging his rifle. Shadow dodged, darting between roots and rocks, drawing their attention away from Titan. The poachers split up, one chasing Shadow, the other creeping closer to the snake. Titan coiled, ready to strike if forced, but his wounds made him sluggish, slow to react. Emily and Ben broke through the trees just as the second poacher lunged at Titan with the net. Emily shouted, "Stop! You're trespassing!" The poacher ignored her, swinging the net. Ben hurled his rope, tangling the man's legs and sending him crashing to the ground. The first poacher, limping, raised his rifle at Shadow. The bobcat stood his ground, hackles raised, every muscle quivering. For a split second, the world froze, man, cat, snake, all locked in a silent standoff. Emily drew her weapon, voice iron hard. "Put it down, now." Lightning flashed, illuminating the fear in the man's eyes. He hesitated, then dropped the rifle and ran, crashing through the underbrush. The other poacher scrambled after him, leaving the net behind. Emily called the sheriff as Ben rushed to check on Shadow and Titan. Shadow limped to Titan's side, nuzzling his broad head against the python's battered scales. Titan, exhausted but alive, lifted his head just enough to brush against Shadow's flank, a gesture that spoke of gratitude and trust. For a few tense moments, the night held its breath. Emily, Ben, and the animals all listened for the sound of more footsteps, more danger. But the only sound was the rain beginning to fall, gentle and cool, washing the blood and fear from the earth. In the aftermath, the bond between Shadow and Titan felt even stronger. Shadow had risked his life for the python, and Titan had not lashed out in panic. Together, with the help of their human protectors, they had survived yet another trial. But Emily knew the threat wasn't over. The world beyond the ranch was watching, and some would stop at nothing to shatter the peace forged beneath the old oak. Still, as dawn crept over the horizon, Shadow and Titan rested side by side, the scars of the night etched into their fur and scales, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next, together. Dawn bled slowly into the Texas sky, painting the world in pink and gray as rain washed away the traces of the night's chaos. For the first time in weeks, the old oak stood silent, not with fear, but with the anticipation of something new. The grove, once just another patch of wild land, now felt like sacred ground, guarded by the courage of a bobcat, the patience of a python, and the quiet resolve of those who believed in the impossible. Emily didn't sleep. She spent the last hours of darkness pacing the grove's perimeter, boots sinking in the mud, her flashlight beams slicing through shadows. She replayed the night's events in her head. The crack of thunder, the desperate standoff, the flash of claws and teeth and fear. Each step she took, she glanced back toward Shadow and Titan, always expecting another attack, another threat. But the only thing she saw was the bobcat and python, nestled together, finally able to rest without watching their backs. Ben sat on a log nearby, knees drawn to his chest, notebook forgotten in his lap. He couldn't shake the image of Shadow leaping into danger, risking everything for Titan. What does it mean? He wondered aloud. Why risk your life for someone you should hate? Emily answered with a tired shrug. Maybe it's just survival, or maybe... She trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. That maybe, just maybe, there was more to the wild than anyone had ever guessed. When the sheriff's cruiser arrived at sunrise, red and blue lights flickering over the wet grass, Emily filled him in on the night's drama. The poachers had vanished, leaving behind a muddy rifle and a broken net. The sheriff shook his head, promising to step up patrols and call in favors from neighboring ranches. You want my advice? He said, eyeing the bobcat and python. Keep them hidden. There's always someone looking to make a buck off something rare. Emily nodded, already planning to post more warning signs, to move the pair deeper into the ranch if needed. But Shadow and Titan had other ideas. As soon as the commotion faded, Shadow led Titan through the grove, pausing often to check for danger. The bobcat's limp was more pronounced, but his spirit hadn't broken. Titan, for his part, moved with slow determination, never straying far from Shadow's side. The day passed in a haze of tension. Ben reviewed the security footage, watching the dance between predator and prey, now allies, again and again. He made calls to wildlife officials, university researchers, even a few trusted journalists. If we don't tell this story right, he said, someone else will twist it. Emily agreed, but her focus was on safety. She set traps, not for animals but for humans, cans tied to strings, branches arranged to snap underfoot, anything to buy a few precious seconds if the poachers came back. By sunset, The atmosphere was electric. News of the attempted poaching spread fast. Some called Emily a hero. Others blamed her for protecting monsters. A small crowd gathered at the edge of the ranch, camera crews and thrill seekers hoping to catch a glimpse. Emily kept them at bay, voice firm and even. "This isn't a zoo," she said. "It's a sanctuary, for as long as they're safe." Inside the grove, a new test unfolded. That evening, the poachers returned, emboldened by greed and anger at being thwarted. This time they moved with more care, creeping along the fence line, cutting the wire with gloved hands. But Emily and Ben were ready. They watched from hiding, hearts pounding, radios crackling softly in their ears. Shadow was the first to sense them. He crept through the grass, belly low, tail flicking. Titan slithered behind, muscles coiled, tongue flicking for signs of trouble. When the poachers stepped into the grove, Shadow made his move, dashing between trees, drawing their eyes and their flashlights. Ben and Emily seized the moment, Emily firing a warning shot into the air, Ben shining a blinding light straight into the poachers' faces. "Sheriff's on the way!" Emily yelled, her voice carrying across the clearing. "Get down or get gone!" Panic broke out. One man tried to grab Titan, but the python reared back, mouth wide in warning, showing the raw pink of his throat. Shadow leapt, swiping at the man's arm, driving him backward. The other poacher ran for the fence, only to trip over a branch rigged with cans, the crash echoing like gunfire. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. The poachers, desperate and disoriented, made a run for it, leaving behind a dropped phone and a backpack filled with rope and tranquilizers. Emily kept her weapon trained until the sheriff's deputies cuffed both men at the road. The aftermath was electric. Relief, disbelief, and a dawning sense of victory. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to hope. "Maybe we can keep them safe," she said quietly. "Maybe the world will see what's possible." Dr. Ben pressed for more. "Let's make it official. We turn this grove into a sanctuary, protected, no trespassing, and we make sure everyone knows these animals aren't monsters. They're proof that the world can change." With the ranch owner's blessing, Emily and Ben called a meeting. The sanctuary designation was pushed through by sunrise, the old rules thrown out in the name of something bigger. For the first time, Shadow and Titan could rest without fear, side by side beneath the oak. As night returned, a gentle peace settled over the land. Emily walked the boundary one last time, lantern in hand, and found Ben sitting by the tree, notebook in his lap, face turned skyward. Shadow stretched, then curled next to Titan, their bodies touching in the grass. The moonlight shimmered off Titan's scales, painting him silver and gold, while Shadow's eyes glowed softly in the darkness. And for the first time since their violent, improbable meeting, the wild felt like home. They had defended the impossible, and won. A new season settled over the Texas ranch, and in the sanctuary of the oak grove, life began to find a strange new rhythm. For the first time in months, Emily could breathe easy as she walked the perimeter, boots brushing wildflowers and dew. The drama and chaos of the past weeks had faded into a cautious peace. The poachers were behind bars, the sanctuary boundaries respected, and the community, though divided, was slowly coming to terms with the miracle in their midst. Shadow and Titan, once natural enemies, became partners in a routine no one could have predicted. Each morning, Shadow would emerge from the thicket, stretching lean muscles and scanning the grove for signs of danger. His movements were slow at first, a limp still lingering, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He would circle the grove, pausing to scent the air, then return to Titan's side, nudging the massive python as if to say, It's safe for now. Titan, in turn, had learned the patterns of his unlikely companion. He would rise slowly, uncoiling from the base of the oak, his scales catching the first rays of sunlight. No longer wary, Titan would slither off to explore, tongue flicking in the cool morning breeze. Sometimes he'd disappear into the tall grass for hours, always returning to the shade of the oak by midday. And always, Shadow would be there waiting, watchful, loyal, never far away. One afternoon, a coyote slunk too close to the grove, its yellow eyes fixed hungrily on a nest of quail chicks hidden near the roots of the oak. Shadow, catching the scent, tensed. Instead of attacking, he let out a low, guttural growl, a warning that carried across the clearing. Titan, sensing the change, raised his head and let his enormous body coil into a loose spiral, making himself look even larger. The coyote paused, reconsidering. With Shadow staring him down and Titan's silent intimidation, the scavenger backed away, vanishing into the brush. Emily, who had been watching from a distance, felt a chill run through her. She whispered into her radio, "Ben, you need to see this." Ben hurried over, notebook in hand, and together they observed as Shadow and Titan patrolled their territory, side by side. There was no violence, just cooperation, a quiet assertion that this was their home, and they'd defend it without bloodshed. The local university sent researchers, their arrival marked by clipboards, cameras, and cautious excitement. They installed motion sensors and observation posts, careful not to disturb the animals. Day after day, they logged hours of footage, documenting subtle signs of communication, a tilt of Shadow's head, a flicker of Titan's tongue, moments of shared alertness and mutual relaxation. The story spread even further, stirring fierce debate among scientists. "Impossible," one zoologist declared on TV. "Bobcats are solitary. Pythons are opportunistic predators. There's no evolutionary logic to this bond." But the evidence was undeniable. Social media buzzed with videos of the pair napping in the sun, Shadow grooming his ragged fur while Titan basked beside him. Children sent drawings and letters. Animal behaviorists argued late into the night, their theories outpaced by the unfolding reality. In the grove, the world's noise faded. The bond between Shadow and Titan deepened in ways no one could measure. Shadow learned to read Titan's subtle cues, when the python was restless, when he was content, when he sensed something off in the wind. Titan, for his part, seemed to anticipate Shadow's moods. He'd move closer on chilly nights, sharing warmth or circle protectively when Shadow dozed in the tall grass. One evening, as dusk settled, Ben witnessed something he would never forget. A young raccoon, bold and reckless, crept toward Titan, drawn by curiosity. Shadow saw it first, but instead of pouncing, he padded over and placed himself between the raccoon and the python. He stared the raccoon down, tail lashing, until the intruder slunk away. Titan, unthreatened, remained motionless, his eyes tracking Shadow's every move. Later, Ben recorded in his journal, "What we're witnessing is not just tolerance, but a partnership. They have learned each other's signals, boundaries, and routines. Every day, their trust grows." The sanctuary began to draw more visitors, students, reporters, even skeptical ranchers from neighboring counties. Emily took to giving talks at the fence line, explaining the rules of respectful distance and reminding everyone, this isn't a spectacle, it's a lesson. The lesson, as it turned out, was bigger than anyone expected. Shadow and Titan challenged every assumption about nature, violence, and survival. Their alliance was dissected in university lectures and debated on talk shows. Some saw it as a hopeful sign that even enemies could find peace. Others insisted it was a fluke, a glitch in the fabric of the wild. But for those who spent time in the grove, the truth was clear. Shadow and Titan had chosen this bond. They had survived, adapted, and learned from each other in a world that said it wasn't possible. And every day, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the stars blinked awake, the bobcat and the python lay together beneath the oak. Two survivors, two teachers, rewriting the rules for everyone watching. And in the hush of twilight, you could almost believe that anything was possible, if only you were brave enough to learn from those you once feared. The sanctuary was never truly silent anymore. As weeks slipped by and summer thickened the air, the old oak grove became the heart of a quiet revolution. What began as a strange alliance between predator and prey was now a living legend drawing people from across Texas, and soon the world. Reporters parked along the fence line. Students picnicked in the wildflowers just for a glimpse, and scientists set up temporary camps, eager to record every gesture and interaction between Shadow and Titan. At first, Emily worried that all the attention would shatter the delicate balance they had fought so hard to preserve. But she found that Shadow and Titan, though wary of the crowds, never strayed far from the grove. Their bond, built through struggle, patience, and small acts of trust, wasn't so easily broken. Shadow had changed. His once youthful fur had started to gray at the muzzle, and he moved a little slower, rising stiffly each morning before patrolling the grove. His eyes, though, remained fierce and clear, always searching for Titan. The python had grown larger, thicker around the middle, his scales polished to a deep, shimmering bronze. He carried the marks of old battles, scrapes and scars that caught the sun, but there was a new ease in his movements, a confidence that came from knowing he was no longer alone. Every day brought visitors. They came for 100 different reasons: to see the miracle for themselves, to challenge their beliefs about nature, or just to witness something pure and hopeful in a world hungry for good news. There were school groups led by teachers who whispered, "Pay attention. This is what empathy looks like." There were old-timers who'd lived on the land all their lives, shaking their heads and muttering, "Never seen anything like it." There were children, their faces pressed to the fence, eyes wide with wonder. One sunny afternoon, a news crew from Houston arrived, their cameras whirring as Emily and Ben stood at the sanctuary edge, answering the same questions for the 100th time. "No, the animals are not trained," Ben explained. "No, we don't intervene unless they're in danger. Yes, we believe this is a first in recorded history." Emily added, "It's not just about a bobcat and a python. It's about what's possible when we let go of old fears." Inside the grove, the mood remained calm. Shadow would rest beneath the oak's heavy limbs. Titan coiled close beside him, both animals unbothered by the distant hum of voices and camera flashes. Sometimes Shadow would limp out of sight, slipping through the brush to hunt. But he always returned. Titan would bask in a patch of sunlight, tongue flicking, and wait. The two grew inseparable. Their routines became legend. Shadow leading Titan on slow, measured walks around the grove's edge. Titan raising his head to scan for danger as Shadow napped in the grass. At night, they curled together under the oak, the bobcat's tail draped across the python's thick coils. One day, a group of school children visited, crowding the fence with sketchbooks and cell phones. Ben stood with them, sharing stories of the early days, the fight for survival, the poachers, the impossible trust. As he spoke, Shadow and Titan emerged together from the thicket, moving so naturally side by side that a hush fell over the crowd. A teacher snapped a photo just as the animals paused, Shadow looking up at Titan, Titan's head turned gently toward his friend. That image, predator and prey, calm and together in the wild, spread across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, it had been shared around the world. The photo changed everything. News outlets from as far as London and Tokyo called for interviews. Wildlife organizations praised the sanctuary for its vision. More importantly, children wrote letters, hundreds of them, sharing how the story of Shadow and Titan gave them hope. If a bobcat and a snake can be friends, one little girl wrote in careful pencil, maybe we can too. Emily and Ben visited schools, talking about the sanctuary's lesson. They brought pictures and videos, letting the students ask endless questions. Are they ever scared of each other? Do they ever fight? Will they stay friends forever? Emily always answered honestly. They have bad days, just like anyone else. Sometimes Shadow wants space, sometimes Titan gets grumpy, but they always come back to each other. That's what real friendship is. As summer slipped toward fall, Shadow's movements slowed further, his coat turning almost silver around the ears. Titan, sensing the change, stayed closer than ever. Some afternoons, Ben would find them sleeping so close together that the bobcat's side rose and fell against the python's smooth scales. It was bittersweet, proof of time's passage but also of a bond that had only grown deeper. One golden evening, Emily returned from a school talk to find a crowd gathered at the fence. Children and parents were all looking at something just inside the grove. When Emily drew near, she saw it. Shadow and Titan napping together in a patch of wildflowers, the last sunlight turning the air to gold. Someone had printed the now famous photo and held it up for the crowd to see. The real scene was even more beautiful. Two lives, once at war, now at peace. That image and the story behind it melted hearts around the world. Donations poured in to support the sanctuary. Scientists published articles, documentaries were filmed. But nothing captured the magic of the grove quite like standing there at dusk, watching the wild become gentle. As the stars blinked into existence and the crowd finally drifted home, Emily lingered by the fence, hand resting on the weathered wood. She watched as Shadow raised his head one last time to nuzzle Titan, then settled back down, content. The lesson was clear. Forgiveness, empathy, and friendship could grow in the unlikeliest places, as long as you left room for hope. And all across the world, people began to question, if a bobcat and a python could change, what else was possible? By now, the old oak grove was more than a sanctuary. It had become a symbol, a place where old wounds and wild instincts had given way to something lasting. As the Texas sun grew softer and the air turned crisp with the promise of fall, the story of Shadow and Titan was no longer just about a bobcat and a python. It had become a mirror in which people everywhere saw their own struggles, their hopes, and the possibility of something better. Dr. Ben Carter stood on stage at a crowded auditorium, the lights hot on his face. A photo of Shadow and Titan napping together projected behind him. It was his first ever TED Talk, and nerves hummed in his chest like a swarm of bees. Yet as he spoke, his voice found its strength, not in scientific jargon, but in the quiet power of what he had witnessed. When we first found them, we thought it was a fluke, Ben told the audience, a brief moment of survival instinct. But it wasn't. Shadow and Titan taught us that empathy and forgiveness can exist even among those we expect to be enemies. They taught us that real strength is the courage to trust, even after pain. He showed a video. Shadow limping around Titan, the python lifting his head, their routines weaving together like a living dance. The crowd watched in silence, then broke into applause. not just for the animals, but for the idea that maybe the old rules weren't the only rules. Back at the ranch, Emily wrote her own story, Compassionate Conservation, Seeing Animals as Individuals, the headline read. Her essay ran in national magazines, challenging policymakers and biologists to reconsider how sanctuaries and wild spaces are managed. We spend so much time categorizing creatures as good or bad, native or invasive, she wrote. But what if we asked instead, what do they need? What can we learn from their capacity for change? The sanctuary itself changed too. What had started as a patch of protected land now drew visitors from across the country. Teachers, families, college students, even politicians seeking inspiration. But not all visitors came for the right reasons. Some questioned why anyone would protect an invasive python or a predator like Shadow. Others tried to turn the story into a parable, stripping away its wild messiness to make it fit their own agenda. Emily learned to guard the grove with patience and firmness, explaining again and again, this isn't about making them pets. It's about honoring their choices, respecting the peace they forged. Shadow and Titan, meanwhile, went about their routines with quiet dignity. The Bobcat, his fur now silvered with age, moved slowly but still watched over the grove each morning, checking the fence line, greeting Titan with a gentle nudge. The python, massive and calm, slithered beside him, sometimes brushing his head against Shadow's side in a silent hello. Their trust, built over years of struggle and risk, had become unbreakable. Researchers from around the world visited, setting up tents and laptops, filling journals with observations. Debates raged in universities and online forums. Was this true friendship, or just a clever adaptation? Did animals really feel empathy, or were people just projecting their own hopes onto them? Yet for those who spent time in the grove, the answer was obvious. On a cool autumn afternoon, a group of school children sat cross-legged in the grass, watching as Shadow and Titan lay together beneath the oak. One boy, quiet and thoughtful, asked Emily, "Do you think they ever get scared?" Emily knelt beside him, voice soft. "I think everyone gets scared sometimes. But I think they learned that it's okay to need help, and to give it too. That's how they survived. That's how they became more than just enemies." The lesson rippled out into the world. People wrote to the sanctuary, sharing stories of reconciliation and unlikely friendships. Parents told their children about Shadow and Titan when arguments flared at home. School counselors used the story to teach forgiveness. Even scientists who doubted at first admitted that the case forced them to rethink old theories. The sanctuary became a pilgrimage site for those seeking hope, a new way of looking at life and all its wild contradictions. One day, as red and gold leaves fell around the grove, Emily led a group of visitors to the old oak. She stood quietly, letting the wind carry her words. We come here looking for answers, but the real gift is the questions. Can we forgive those who've hurt us? Can we see past old labels to something new? Can we risk trusting the impossible? As she spoke, Shadow and Titan rested together in the long grass, oblivious to the awe their presence inspired. The two had long since stopped worrying about the world beyond the fence. For them, every sunrise was a chance to begin again, to trust, to watch out for one another, to rest in the shade of forgiveness. Later, Ben captured a moment on video. A young fox wandered into the grove, curiosity battling with caution. Shadow stood, stiff-legged but calm, while Titan watched with bright, ancient eyes. The fox paused, then retreated, not chased away but gently turned aside by the silent presence of the two guardians. It was a small scene, easy to miss, but to Ben, it was the story in miniature. peace maintained not by violence, but by presence and understanding. Emily sent copies of her essay to lawmakers, arguing for compassionate conservation in every state. She spoke at conferences, urging leaders to see animals as individuals, not just species. The message took root, slowly but surely, in classrooms, in public parks, and in hearts hungry for hope. As autumn deepened, the sanctuary's story became legend. The world didn't suddenly become perfect. People still argued, and old prejudices lingered. But in the shadow of the oak, the miracle of forgiveness was etched into the land itself. A lesson that survival is never just about strength, but about empathy, risk, and the endless possibility of change. And for those who listened, who really listened, the story of Shadow and Titan became more than just a tale. It became a blueprint for a better way forward, wild and true. Years slipped by, weaving new memories through the old oak grove as time settled gently over the land. What began as an impossible friendship had become legend, not just in Texas, but around the world. Yet to those who truly knew the grove, the magic wasn't in the headlines, the news stories, or even the viral photos. It was in the way the morning sunlight poured through the branches, painting golden patterns on fur and scales, as Shadow and Titan rested beneath their tree. It was in the hush of dusk, when the wild seemed to hold its breath, as if honoring a secret known only to them. Shadow was now an old bobcat, his fur nearly silver, moving slowly but with the quiet dignity of a life well lived. His eyes, though a little dimmer, still burned with curiosity every dawn as he limped through his familiar circuit, marking the territory not as a conqueror, but as a guardian. Titan, larger than ever, his body thick and powerful, seemed to sense his friend's every ache and hesitation. The python's own movements had grown slower, more measured, but he remained a silent sentinel, always close, always ready to curl around Shadow on cold nights or stretch out side by side in the warm afternoon sun. The world outside the sanctuary moved on, seasons passing in a blur of headlines and change. But in the grove, time spun its own gentle rhythm. Every few months, a new group of students or scientists would visit, cameras in hand, notebooks at the ready, but the heart of the story remained unchanged. Two animals, once locked in a battle for survival, now bound by a trust deeper than instinct. Dr. Ben Carter and Ranger Emily Brooks had become the unofficial storytellers of the grove. Their roles shifted with the years, sometimes protectors, sometimes witnesses, always students of the lessons Shadow and Titan continued to teach. On a bright spring day, Emily arrived with her own children in tow, leading them through the wildflowers to the foot of the oak. Her youngest gasped when he spotted Shadow, his grizzled face turned toward them, Titan's massive form coiled beside him. "Mom, is that them? The real ones from the story?" Emily nodded, crouching beside her children. "That's them. Want to know a secret? When I was your age, I thought enemies could never be friends. I thought trust was too dangerous. But they proved me wrong." Her daughter, wide-eyed, asked, "Are they ever scared?" "All the time," Emily answered. "But the bravest thing you can do is trust, especially when it's hard." Beneath the oak, Shadow struggled to stand, his legs stiff from age. Titan nudged him gently, lending warmth and balance. The children watched in silence as the bobcat, shaking but determined, took a few slow steps, then settled back against Titan's massive coils. There was no fear between them, only comfort, a wordless promise that neither would ever be alone. Ben arrived a few minutes later, carrying a faded photo album thick with pictures, letters, and news clippings from around the world. Together with Emily, he sat under the tree, letting their kids flip through the pages. That's Shadow as a kitten, Ben pointed out. Back when he was the wildest thing on the ranch. And there's Titan, not long after he arrived. People used to call him a monster. Emily's son frowned, puzzled. He doesn't look scary. Ben smiled. That's the point. People are always scared of what they don't know. But when you look closer, when you give things a chance, you find out they're just as scared as you. Stories drifted around the grove. The time Shadow protected Titan from poachers. The winter night when Titan shielded Shadow from the cold. The first viral photo that made the world believe in miracles. But the greatest miracle was the everyday one. Two creatures sharing their lives, rewriting the rules of the wild, and, for those willing to see, the rules of the human heart. As the years rolled on, Shadow's steps grew heavier. There were days he didn't patrol at all, content to nap in the dappled sunlight, Titan always close by. The sanctuary, now famous, was visited by people from every continent, each one leaving a little more hopeful, a little less certain about the old boundaries that once seemed so permanent. When Shadow's time finally came, the whole grove seemed to pause. Titan curled protectively around his friend, his massive body sheltering the frail Bobcat in a living embrace. Emily and Ben stood nearby, hearts aching with the beauty and sadness of the moment. The children, now older, wept quietly, understanding for the first time the depth of what they were witnessing. Afterward, Titan remained beneath the oak, rarely straying far. Visitors said they felt a hush, a sense of reverence, like stepping into a cathedral built not of stone, but of trust and memory. Emily and Ben tended the grove, planting wildflowers around Shadow's resting place. Sometimes, they brought their own children, sitting in the grass and telling the old story again and again. Emily would always finish with the same words. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is trust the impossible. Shadow and Titan didn't just survive. They healed each other and showed us that the wild is full of surprises, forgiveness, and hope. The oak stood tall, its branches arching over the sanctuary like an ancient guardian. And beneath it, Titan lived on, a living testament to the bond that had changed everything. The story of the bobcat and the python rippled out across the world, a gentle reminder that what we fear most might just be the beginning of something miraculous. So, when children visited, Emily would point to the old tree and say, "Look closely. Miracles happen where you least expect them. All you have to do is keep your heart open and let yourself believe." And in the shade of the oak, where fur and scales once tangled in battle but now rested in peace, the impossible friendship endured, proof that even the wildest hearts can learn to trust, to forgive, and to love, no matter how unlikely it may seem.